Okay, think about this. A world without phones, no internet, no quick flights across the globe.
Seems almost unimaginable now, doesn't it?
Right. It sounds totally disconnected. But if you look back at the period between, say, 1200 and 1450, the world was actually, well, surprisingly connected in many ways.
Absolutely. It's like this intricate global tapestry being woven even without instant communication. You had threads of trade, ideas, even conflicts stretching across continents.
Yeah, it's fascinating how these different societies were flourishing, often kind of unaware of each other in detail, but still part of these larger trends.
Huge shifts happening simultaneously, different flavors in different places.
And that's exactly what we want to dig into today. We've got a whole stack of sources here, and the plan is to pull out the really compelling bits, the insightful nuggets to understand this era.
Make some connections, maybe.
Definitely make connections. We'll journey through East Asia, focusing on the Song dynasty, which was a powerhouse, then into Dar al-Islam, down to South and Southeast Asia, across to the Americas, over to Africa, and finally landing in Europe.
And the contrasts are really striking when you look at it that way.
Like what?
Well, you've got these incredible intellectual centers like, say, Baghdad, preserving and expanding knowledge. At the same time, completely independently, powerful empires are rising in the Americas with totally different ways of thinking about the world, about power.
Well, think about the kinds of ships the Song Chinese were building.
Yeah.
These sophisticated junks sailing the seas.
Well, in Europe, power was much more localized, land-based feudal systems. It's quite the juxtaposition.
Okay, let's dive in. Where better to start than East Asia, and specifically Song Dynasty China, often called the real engine of innovation back then.
The Song, yeah, lasted over 300 years, hugely transformative. And at its heart, you had this governing philosophy rooted in Confucianism.
And later Neo-Confucianism, right?
Exactly. Think of Confucianism as laying out the social rules, hierarchy, duty, respect. Filial piety is a big one.
Respect for your elders, your parents, your superiors.
Yes. And this wasn't just family stuff, it scaled right up to the emperor. Neo-Confucianism sort of updated it, bringing in some spiritual bits from Buddhism and Taoism to make it a more complete worldview.
So how did they translate that philosophy into, like, running the government?
That's where the civil service exam comes in. It's really interesting. The idea was to get the smartest people, the ones who'd really mastered the Confucian classics, into the bureaucracy.
A meritocracy, in theory. Anyone could study, pass the exam, and rise up.
Well, that was the ideal. Our sources suggest, though, it wasn't quite so simple. I mean, if your family was wealthy, you had tutors, you had time to study.
You got a massive advantage.
Exactly. So while it did allow some social mobility, the elite often, well, stayed elite. It really shaped Chinese society for centuries.
And these ideas also heavily influenced gender roles, didn't they?
Oh, absolutely. Women might have had respect within the family structure, but legally, their rights were pretty limited. Property usually went to the sons.
And then there's the practice of foot binding. It's hard to even comprehend.
It really is. Starting on young girls, binding their feet so tightly they couldn't grow properly. Incredibly painful.
And it became a status symbol.
Bizarrely, yes. For elite men, it severely restricted women's movement, their lives. It's a very stark example of that social hierarchy in practice.
Okay, so if we pull back a bit, how did China's influence spread across East Asia? Let's look at Korea.
Korea had this interesting relationship. They kept their independence mostly through a tributary system, basically, acknowledging China was the big brother and sending gifts.
Like paying respect diplomatically.
Right. But culturally, they really embraced Chinese models. They adopted the civil service exam, Confucian principles.
Did they take it further in some ways?
Actually, yes. Our sources indicate that the marginalization of women became even more pronounced in Korea under this system than in China itself.
Wow. Okay, contrast that with Japan. They seem to have taken a different approach, more picky.
Selective is a good word. Japan's adoption was more voluntary borrowing. They liked certain bureaucratic ideas, Buddhism, the writing system, especially earlier on.
But they didn't just copy-paste everything?
No, they adapted things to fit their own context. They never really went for that fully centralized Chinese-style bureaucracy. It was more like picking and choosing from the menu.
Cherry picking, yeah.
Yep.
Makes sense. And Vietnam, to the south.
Similar relationship to Korea, in some ways tributary status, adopted Confucianism, the exams. But crucially, they pushed back strongly against the Chinese model for women.
How so?
They kept traditions of powerful female figures, female deities, and importantly, they never adopted foot binding. Never.
So even with a powerful neighbor like China, local culture could still hold strong.
Definitely. It shows cultural influence isn't just a one-way flood. It gets filtered, resisted, adapted.
Okay, let's switch gears slightly but stay in the region. Buddhism.
Yeah.
Huge influence, right?
Immense. It started in South Asia, of course, but really shaped China and beyond. The core ideas, the Four Noble Truths about suffering and its cessation.
And the Eightfold Path as the way to end suffering.
Right. Ethical conduct, mental discipline, wisdom. It offered a very different spiritual path compared to Confucianism's focus on social order.
And Buddhism itself wasn't monolithic. It changed as it spread.
Oh, completely.
Yeah.
You get Theravada Buddhism, big in Southeast Asia and Sri Lanka,
Yeah.
emphasizing the monastic path to enlightenment.
More traditional, maybe?
In a sense, yes. Then Mahayana Buddhism becomes dominant in East Asia. This version stresses that enlightenment is open to everyone, not just monks.
And the Buddha becomes more like a divine figure you can pray to.
Sort of, yes. A figure of great compassion. And then you also have Tibetan Buddhism, with its unique mystical elements.
And China developed its own flavor too, Chan Buddhism.
Chan, yes. Better known perhaps as Zen in Japan. Strong emphasis on meditation, direct experience. It really meshed well with some Taoist ideas already present in China. So even while Confucianism ran the state, Buddhism was deeply woven into the cultural and spiritual fabric.
Okay, let's talk about why the Song dynasty is seen as such an economic powerhouse. What was going on there?
Well, the economy just took off. It became incredibly commercialized. They weren't just farming for subsistence. They were producing for markets, trading actively.
And didn't they pioneer some financial innovations?
Big time. Widespread use of paper money. Think about that.
Instead of lugging coins everywhere.
Exactly. And credit systems, promissory notes, it all oiled the wheels of commerce massively.
That must have been revolutionary. And what about industry?
Huge strides there, too. Iron and steel production ramped up significantly.
What do they use all that metal for?
Everything from agricultural tools and weapons to bridges and even coins. It shows a really sophisticated manufacturing base. But maybe the biggest single boost to the economy came from agriculture.
Champa rice. I've read about this.
That's the one. It came over from Vietnam.
And it grew faster. Was drought resistant.
Both. You could get 2, sometimes even 3 harvests a year in the South. That meant way more food.
Which means you can support a larger population.
Precisely. Population boomed during the Song, and to move all these goods, the rice, the manufactured items, and the people, they invested heavily in transport.
Expanding the Grand Canal, wasn't it?
Yeah, linking the major river systems, a massive undertaking. And for sea travel,
A magnetic compass.
developed and widely used. Plus, major improvements in shipbuilding. They built these huge ships called junks.
With watertight bulkheads.
Like compartments. Exactly. So if one part got damaged, the whole ship wouldn't necessarily sink. And stern-mounted rudders for better steering. It made sea travel much safer, more reliable, boosting maritime trade. The Song era was just buzzing with innovation.
Incredible. Okay, let's journey west now into the Dar al-Islam, the House of Islam, during roughly the same time. A very different world, but also one deeply shaped by religion.
Absolutely. And you have the interplay of the 3 big monotheistic faiths here: Judaism, Christianity, and of course, Islam.
Islam spread incredibly fast, didn't it? Creating this vast zone of shared culture and trade across Afro-Eurasia.
It did. And one point our sources often make is Islam's inherent connection to trade from the very beginning.
Because the Prophet Muhammad himself was a merchant.
Exactly. So there wasn't the same kind of early ambivalence towards wealth and commerce that you sometimes saw in early Christianity. Trade was seen as a perfectly respectable, even encouraged activity.
That must have spurred economic activity in Islamic lands.
Hugely important factor. Now, politically, this period sees some major shifts. The Abbasid Caliphate, which had overseen this amazing golden age centered in Baghdad,
Yeah.
it starts to fragment.
Like the central authority weakens and new powers emerge.
Precisely. And often these new powers were Turkic peoples, not Arabs who had dominated earlier.
Right, like the Seljuk Turks.
The Seljuks, yes. They came from Central Asia, initially as military muscle for the Abbasids, but eventually took effective political control. Then you have the Mamluks in Egypt.
They were originally enslaved soldiers, right? Turkic warriors.
That's right. Who seized power after the time of the famous Saladin. And then further east in India, you get the Delhi Sultanate, established by Turkic Muslim invaders.
So a lot of fragmentation, new Turkic-led states rising. Were there common features?
There were. The military often remained central to how these states were run, and Sharia law, based on the Quran and Islamic tradition, generally provided the legal framework.
And Islam itself continued to spread. It wasn't just confined to these new states.
No, it kept expanding, sometimes through military conquest, like the Delhi Sultanate pushing into India.
But also through trade.
Definitely. Merchant networks were crucial, linking North Africa with West Africa, think Mali, connecting vast regions. And another key factor was Sufi missionaries.
Ah, Sufism. That's the mystical branch of Islam.
Yes. More focused on a personal, direct experience of God. It was often more adaptable, more accessible to people in different cultures.
Less about strict legal interpretation, more about spiritual connection.
Generally speaking, yes. Sufis often incorporated local traditions or saints, which made Islam resonate more deeply in places like Southeast Asia or parts of Africa.
So expansion through conquest, trade, and this more mystical, personal approach. Now, the Islamic world wasn't just about power politics. It was this incredible hub of learning and innovation, too, right? Continuing the Golden Age legacy.
Absolutely. Even with the political fragmentation, intellectual life flourished. Take mathematics. You have figures like Nasir al-Din al-Tusi.
What did he do?
Groundbreaking work in trigonometry. He literally wrote the book on it, his treatise on the quadrilateral, foundational stuff.
Wow. And literature.
You have amazing Sufi poets like Ayesha al-Baunia. Her work shows incredible spiritual depth and literary skill.
And medicine. I feel like I've heard about advancements there.
Ibn Sina, or Avicenna as he was known in the West, his canon of medicine was the standard medical textbook for centuries, not just in the Islamic world, but in Europe too, once it was translated.
So they weren't just innovating, they were also preserving older knowledge.
Hugely important role. Thinkers like Averroes, Ibn Rushd, and Avicenna studied the ancient Greek philosophers, especially Aristotle. They wrote detailed commentaries, debated their ideas.
Keeping that knowledge alive when it was largely lost in Western Europe.
Exactly. Places like the House of Wisdom in Baghdad were dedicated translation centers. And Al-Andalus, Islamic Spain, was crucial. Cordoba, Toledo. These cities were melting pots. Muslim, Jewish, Christian scholars all interacting, translating texts, sharing ideas. A huge amount of knowledge flowed from Al-Andalus back into Europe, helping to spark the Renaissance later on.
It's amazing how interconnected intellectual life was even back then. Okay, let's shift focus again, moving southeast to South and Southeast Asia. A really complex region religiously, isn't it? Hinduism, Islam, Buddhism, all interacting.
Very much so. South Asia, basically the Indian subcontinent, was predominantly Hindu for millennia. You know, with its vast pantheon, the idea of Brahman, reincarnation, the caste system, very deeply embedded.
Buddhism started there too, of course.
Yes, originated there, shared some core ideas like reincarnation, but by 1200, it was really declining in India itself.
And then Islam arrives more forcefully with the Delhi Sultanate around 1206.
Right. It becomes the religion of the rulers in large parts of the north, the elite. Southeast Asia, meanwhile, was even more of a mix. Hinduism, Buddhism, and increasingly Islam, especially through trade routes.
And within these big religions, there were changes happening too, movements.
Definitely. Within Hinduism, you see the rise of the Bhakti movement.
What was that about?
It emphasized passionate personal devotion to one particular god, like Vishnu or Shiva. It was more emotional, more direct.
And did it challenge existing structures?
Yes, significantly. Bhakti poets and saints often rejected the rigid hierarchy of the caste system, saying spiritual experience was open to everyone regardless of birth.
That sounds quite radical.
It was. And interestingly, it has some parallels with Sufism in Islam, which was also gaining ground in South Asia.
How so?
Both emphasized that personal, mystical connection to the divine, often bypassing complex rituals or priestly hierarchies. They kind of resonated on a similar wavelength, focusing on direct spiritual feeling.
Fascinating. And what about Buddhism in South Asia during this time? You said it was declining.
Yeah, in India itself, it became much more focused on monastic life as the main path to nirvana, less of a widespread popular religion compared to its earlier days.
Okay, let's look at state building. The Delhi Sultanate establishes Muslim rule, but how successful were they in converting the whole population?
They faced real challenges. Hinduism was just too deeply rooted in the culture and social structure. Conversions happened, especially in the Northwest and Northeast, but India remained predominantly Hindu.
And there was resistance.
Oh, yes. In the South, you see the rise of the powerful Vijayanagara Empire, a staunchly Hindu kingdom that directly challenged the Sultanate's expansion. And in the north and west, you had various Rajput kingdoms, Hindu warrior principalities holding out.
So a complex political map. Now, Southeast Asia, you mentioned maritime and land-based states. Let's start with the sea-based ones. Srivijaya.
Srivijaya, based in Sumatra, their power came from controlling the Strait of Malacca, a critical choke point for sea trade between the Indian Ocean and the South China Sea.
Like controlling a major highway.
Exactly. Huge tolls, huge influence. Culturally, they were influenced by both Hinduism and Buddhism. Later, you get the Majapahit Empire based on Java.
Also powerful traders.
Yes, also Hindu-Buddhist, exerting influence through trade and a tributary system across the archipelago. And then in mainland Southeast Asia, the Sukhothai Kingdom in Thailand.
What was their focus?
They strongly promoted Theravada Buddhism, using it to unify their kingdom and legitimize the king's rule. Religion and power going hand in hand.
Seems like a common theme. What about the land-based kingdom?
The Khmer Empire in Cambodia is the big one, famous for Angkor Wat.
Which started as a Hindu temple complex, right?
Yes. Dedicated to Vishnu initially.
Yeah.
But later, the Khmer rulers embraced Buddhism, so you get this amazing blend, this syncretism in their art and architecture. And don't forget the Sinhala dynasties in Sri Lanka.
An island, but more land-focused.
Right. A long-lasting stronghold of Theravada Buddhism focused on agriculture and internal administration more than dominating sea lanes.
Okay. Quite a diverse picture across South and Southeast Asia.
Yeah.
Now let's jump across the Pacific to the Americas. These societies developed in almost complete isolation from Afro-Eurasia, didn't they?
Pretty much, yeah, until the very end of this period and beyond. In Mesoamerica, Mexico, and Central America, you had the legacy of earlier civilizations like the Maya.
Known for their city-states, complex calendars, writing.
And tributary systems, yes, and human sacrifice, which was a significant part of their cosmology. The Aztecs, or Mexica as they called themselves, who came later, definitely built on some Mayan foundations.
And their capital, Tenochtitlan. It sounds incredible.
Yeah.
A city on a lake.
An engineering marvel, huge population, massive marketplaces, causeways connecting it to the mainland, enormous pyramid temples right in the center, really impressive.
How did they manage their empire? Was it centralized?
Not entirely. It was more of a tributary empire. They conquered other groups and demanded payments, goods, food, textiles, even people for sacrifice.
Sacrifice was central to their religion, wasn't it?
Very central. They believed they needed to feed the sun god, Huitzilopochtli, with human hearts to keep the sun rising each day. This religious imperative was a major driver for their constant warfare and expansion.
And they used agriculture techniques like chinampas.
Yes, these artificial islands built in the lake shallows, incredibly fertile, floating gardens, essentially. Very productive.
Okay, now down to South America, the Andes. The Inca Empire, different from the Aztecs.
Quite different in structure, yes.
Yeah.
While the Aztecs were more decentralized tribute collectors, the Inca built a highly centralized empire.
With a strong bureaucracy.
Extensive bureaucracy, yeah. They expanded incredibly rapidly through military might in the mid-1400s, and they had this system called the mita.
What was that?
It wasn't tribute in goods so much as tribute in labor. People owed the state a certain amount of work each year, farming state lands, building roads, serving in the army.
And they built a massive road system, didn't they?
Incredible network of roads and bridges spanning the Andes, essential for communication, moving troops, administering their vast territory. Centralization and infrastructure were key for the Inca.
Let's head north now to North America. What was happening there?
In the Mississippi River Valley, you had the Mississippian culture.
The mound builders.
That's them. Cahokia, near modern St. Louis, was a huge center. These were agricultural societies, growing maize, beans, squash.
And they had chiefs. A hierarchy.
Yes, a clear hierarchy. Rulers known as great sons at the top. The mounds they built were used for elite burials, temples, chiefs' residences, very complex societies.
And out in the drier Southwest, places like Chaco Canyon and Mesa Verde.
Really interesting adaptations there. They lived in a tough, arid environment, so water management was crucial. They built sophisticated irrigation systems.
And those cliff dwellings at Mesa Verde. Built right into the rock face.
Exactly. Using sandstone blocks, remarkable architecture perfectly suited to the landscape. It really shows the diversity of state building and adaptation across the Americas.
Completely different trajectories from Afro-Eurasia. Okay, let's cross the Atlantic now to Africa. Another vast continent with incredible diversity.
Absolutely. Let's start on the East African coast, the Swahili coast.
Not one big empire, but city-states.
Exactly. Independent city-states like Kilwa, Mombasa, Zanzibar, thriving on Indian Ocean trade.
What were they trading?
Gold, ivory, timber coming from the interior, traded for goods from Arabia, Persia, India, even China. Sadly, enslaved people were also part of this trade.
And Islam was influential here, too.
Very much so, especially among the ruling merchant elites. It facilitated trade connections. The Swahili language itself is a blend of local Bantu languages and Arabic.
Fascinating mix. And further inland, Great Zimbabwe.
Yes, a powerful kingdom in the interior. Their wealth also came largely from controlling the gold trade flowing towards the coast. They built this massive capital city entirely out of stone, without mortar, impressive structures.
What about West Africa? We hear about empires like Ghana, Mali, Songhai.
Right, those powerful Sahelian empires rose and fell, largely controlling the trans-Saharan trade routes. We'll probably cover them more when we look at trade networks specifically. But let's also mention Ethiopia.
Which stands out because it was Christian.
Yes, a long-established Christian kingdom, distinct from its increasingly Muslim neighbors. It was also wealthy through trade, linking the Mediterranean and Indian Ocean worlds, trading salt and other goods. It had a centralized monarchy.
And the House of Kingdoms, where were they?
In what's now northern Nigeria. Like the Swahili coast, they were a collection of independent city-states, but their trade was focused north across the Sahara.
So key hubs on the trans-Saharan routes.
Exactly. Very urbanized, very commercial. They acted as middlemen. Their rulers often converted to Islam, again, partly to smooth trade relations with North African Muslim merchants.
So trade and religion, again, shaping politics, but in diverse ways across Africa. Okay, final stop. Europe seems quite different from the large empires we've seen elsewhere during this time.
It really does. The big unifying force in Western Europe wasn't political, it was religious. Roman Catholic Christianity.
A legacy of the Roman Empire.
Yes, dating back to Constantine. Eastern Orthodox Christianity continued in the Byzantine Empire, centered on Constantinople.
Until 1453, when the Ottomans conquered it.
A major turning point. After that, Kievan Rus and later Moscow became the main center for Eastern Orthodoxy. But in the West, the Catholic Church, with the Pope in Rome, was hugely influential, even though politically the region was fragmented.
Fragmented into what? Kingdoms?
Kingdoms, duchies, principalities. But power wasn't highly centralized initially. The dominant system was feudalism.
Lords, vassals, knights, oaths of loyalty, that kind of thing.
Exactly. A complex web of personal allegiances based on land granted in exchange for military service. Power was very localized.
And the economy was based on manorialism.
Largely, yes. Peasants or serfs were tied to the land, working for a lord in exchange for protection and a place to live. Not a lot of social mobility there.
So decentralized politics, a land-based economy, but the church provided some unity.
A lot of cultural and religious unity, yes. The church hierarchy was a parallel power structure. Events like the Crusades were, in part, attempts to unify European Christians against Muslims, though they also ended up stimulating trade and contact with the East.
Were there other religious groups?
Yes, significant Jewish communities existed throughout Europe, often facing discrimination and periodic persecution. Anti-Semitism was rising. And, of course, in the Iberian Peninsula, you still had Muslim rule in Al-Andalus, though it was gradually being pushed back by Christian kingdoms.
But you said power was starting to centralize towards the end of this period.
Yes, slowly but surely. Some monarchs began to consolidate power, building up their own armies, creating more direct administration and bureaucracies, chipping away at the power of the feudal lords. This often led to more competition and warfare between these emerging states, like England and France.
Okay, wow. We've literally been all over the map, from Song China to the Andes, from West Africa to feudal Europe. Let's try to pull some threads together now. Comparing this whole period, 1200 to 1450, what are some big similarities you see across these vastly different regions?
Well, one thing that really stands out is the use of belief systems, religion, philosophy to legitimize rule. It looks different everywhere, but the principle is similar.
Confucianism in China, Islam across Dar al-Islam in parts of Africa, Christianity in Europe, Hinduism, Buddhism in South and Southeast Asia.
Exactly. Rulers claimed divine backing or adherence to a respected tradition to justify their authority. Another similarity is the development of states needing ways to manage people and resources.
So bureaucracies like China's or tribute systems like the Aztecs used.
Right. Or the Meta system in the Inca Empire. Different methods, same goal.
Yeah.
Organize the state, extract wealth. And trade is another huge common factor.
The growth of these long-distance networks, Silk Roads, Indian Ocean, Trans-Saharan.
They fueled the growth of cities everywhere, spurred innovation, and led to the exchange of goods, ideas, technologies, even diseases. Think about papermaking spreading from China, or mathematical ideas from India via the Islamic world to Europe.
So religion for legitimacy, state administration systems, and the impact of trade seem like key common
I
threads.
think so, yes. Plus, just the general process of state building itself, consolidating power, defining territories, even if the results looked very different.
Okay, so what about the major differences then? What really sets these regions apart during this era?
Well, the degree of centralization is a big one. You have the highly centralized empires like Song China or the Inca.
Compared to the fragmented feudalism of Western Europe, or maybe the independent city-states of the Swahili coast or Hausa lands?
Precisely. Huge difference in how power operated day to day. Another key difference is how states dealt with religious diversity.
Some more tolerant than others.
Generally, yes. You saw periods of significant tolerance in parts of the Islamic world, like Al-Andalus for a time or the Ottoman Empire later. Contrast that with the push for religious uniformity in Catholic Europe or the religious demands of the Aztec state.
The type of empire also varied, right? Sea-based versus land-based.
Good point. Southeast Asia, dominated by maritime powers controlling trade routes. West Africa, dominated by large land empires controlling trans-Saharan trade. China and the Inca were primarily land empires too, though the Song had a powerful navy.
And just the fundamental cultural foundations were obviously very different. Confucian ideals versus Islamic law versus Andean cosmology.
Absolutely. These underlying worldviews shaped everything from social structures and gender roles to art and science. So while there were connections and common trends, the regional flavors remain incredibly distinct.
So it's this picture of a world that's both surprisingly connected through things like trade and religion, but also incredibly diverse, with unique developments happening everywhere.
Exactly. It wasn't a static period at all. It was incredibly dynamic, lots of continuity with the past, but also profound changes setting the stage for what came next.
And that's really what we try to get at with these deep dives, isn't it? Cutting through all the noise to find those connections, those contrasts, those really insightful bits.
Yeah, looking across regions like this gives you a much richer picture than just studying one place in isolation. You see the bigger patterns, the echoes, the divergences. It helps understand how our modern world eventually came together, even from these earlier, distinct starting points.
Okay, so here's something for you, our listeners, to chew on. We talk about the different degrees of political centralization, from the tight control of the Inca to the fragmentation of feudal Europe. How do you think those different political structures might have affected how well these societies could adapt or react to the huge global shifts that started happening in the next few centuries, like European expansion, for instance?
That's a great question. How does your internal organization shape your response to external pressures? Lots to think about there.
Definitely something to mull over. And hey, if any particular region or theme we touched on today grabbed your interest, we really hope you'll dig deeper yourself. Until our next deep dive.